Order restored in Jakarta, Bali after week-long national unrest. And international passengers at Bali's Ngurah Airport are required to complete a declaration via the All Indonesia app. Stay tuned for details on these and other stories. Selamat pagi. Welcome to the latest news from Bali and Indonesia. This is September 3rd, 2025, and my name is Bruce. And what is the weather like today? Well, there's no wind right now, which is great because the last couple of days the wind has just been incredible, blowing everywhere, and reports around the island of trees falling down and roofs being blown off. Here in Singaraja, well, I couldn't clean anything. There's dirt, sand, and leaves and all sorts of stuff all over the balcony inside my room. But today it seems to be calm so far, and let's hope so. The temperature at 8:30 in the morning is 29 degrees Celsius. The humidity is 70%, and the wind speed is 0.1 kilometers per hour. And so much has happened since last Wednesday. You are probably aware of all the unrest that has gone on around the country, and that is basically what we're going to be talking about today, with the exception of this new app that tourists are going to have to use. And so let's get started. This may go a little over today. And as usual, lots of stuff that I'm not going to cover, and the links are down below in the description if you want to read those. So, first, what's happening with the political, social, economic situation in Indonesia? Order restored in Jakarta, Bali after week-long national unrest. Conditions in many regions have begun to stabilize after days of nationwide protest over lawmakers' lavish salaries and allegations of police brutality, though scattered demonstrations are still taking place in several cities. Bali governor has confirmed that all activities on the island have returned to normal following a protest on Saturday at the Bali Police Headquarters and the Bali Legislative Council office, during which police reportedly used tear gas to disperse demonstrators. Well, they didn't reportedly, did it? They was on the video. Bali is now very safe, conducive, and peaceful. We invite both domestic and international tourists, let's not forget those tourists, to visit and enjoy its natural beauty, warm hospitality, and rich cultural heritage. Despite massive unrest across the country, Bali's tourism industry remains largely unaffected, according to Perry Marcos, Secretary of the Indonesia Hotel and Restaurants Association, PHRI, Bali chapter. There hasn't been a significant impact. A few hotels have reported minor cancellations, but nothing substantial. Perry added that most tourist activity continues as usual. And if you watch any TikToks or Instagrams from the influencers down in Canggu, they seem to be unaware that anything was happening other than their new Botox injections in their lips and their usual narcissistic claptrap. Order has returned to Jakarta, the epicenter of last week's protest and unrest, which left more than 450 people injured across the city. The situation in Jakarta has returned to normal, and all public transportation services have resumed operations since Monday, although several stations remain out of service because they were burned down, according to the governor of Jakarta. Over the weekend, the city's bus rapid transit operator, Transjakarta, suspended all services after 7 bus stations were torched and 22 others vandalized during days of violent demonstrations. MRT Jakarta also halted some of its operations after rioters damaged one of its stations. To support residents in the aftermath of the unrest, Governor Pramono announced that Transjakarta MRT and LRT services will be free of charge until September 8th. The protest began in Jakarta on August 25th, where demonstrators protested lawmakers' lavish housing allowances and perceived arrogance. The unrest then spread nationwide after a motorcycle taxi driver was fatally run over by a police tactical vehicle on Thursday during the demonstrations. Amid the unrest, protesters set fire to regional representative councils, DPRD buildings in 3 provinces and looted the homes of several public officials, including the private residence of Finance Minister Sri Mulyani. According to the Commission for Missing Persons and Victims of Violence, at least 20 people have been reported missing. The National Commission on Human Rights reported on Tuesday that at least 11 people have died across the country during the week-long civil unrest. Among the victims were 2 university students. Both were suspected to have died as a result of police violence. Protests have continued across multiple cities on Monday and Tuesday, though they have remained relatively peaceful. In Palembang, South Sumatra, hundreds of students gathered in front of the South Sumatra DPRD building on Monday, calling for the cancellation of lawmakers' housing allowances, the immediate passage of the asset forfeiture bill, a review of President Prabowo Subianto's expensive free meal program, the release of all detained protesters, and firm action against officers responsible for violence against demonstrators. The rally ended peacefully after South Sumatra DPRD Speaker took an oath on the Quran, pledging to deliver the students' demands to the central government. A similar demonstration was held in Jayapura, Papua, where more than 100 students gathered in front of the DPRD building on Monday. The protest also concluded without violence. And there'll be a few more stories on this I'm going to be talking about. But first, let's take a look at what's happening for tourists and some new requirements. International passengers at Bali's Ngurah Airport are required to complete a declaration via the All Indonesia app. If you've used this already, leave a comment. I'd like to see if it's actually working. International flight passengers at Soekarno-Hatta Airport and at Gusti Ngurah Airport in Bali, as well as the international port in Batam, are required to fill out an arrival declaration via the All Indonesia Application starting Monday, 2 days ago. Simultaneously, the application trial is also being expanded to airports for all airlines as well as international ports and borders. The All Indonesia application is presented to simplify the process of declaring international passenger arrivals while providing an easier, faster, and safer travel experience. Through this application, filing out arrival forms for immigration, customs, and excise, health, and quarantine is now integrated into one digital system. Passengers can fill in All Indonesia 3 days before arriving in Indonesia from their country of origin or upon landing. Filling out the arrival declaration through All Indonesia is free of charge. Acting Director of Immigration stated that the presence of this application is a concrete manifestation of Indonesia's commitment to providing friendly and efficient digital public services. He said with this application, the arrival process at airports or ports is not only shorter and safer, but also user-friendly for all passengers, both individuals and groups, including the elderly, people with disabilities, and children. With this integration, international passengers arriving in Indonesia no longer need to fill out an electronic customs declaration because the entire customs declaration process is integrated into the digital system. The integration of health declarations into the All Indonesia app allows the Ministry of Health to detect potential risk of infectious diseases that could potentially lead to outbreaks early on, allowing for rapid response at the country's entry points. This is an important part of the regional early warning system built in to safeguard public health. With the All Indonesia single declaration, passengers can easily report their baggage for quarantine inspection and more effective monitoring while ensuring food security and national economic protection. The passenger declaration forms can be accessed via the allindonesia.imigrasi.go.id website or by downloading the app on Google Play or the App Store. We urge all international flight passengers, both Indonesian and foreign, to report their arrival through this application. I don't know how this is being publicized because of some friends from South Korea are coming here in a couple of weeks. They hadn't heard anything about it until I told them about it. So if you've got any experience, leave a comment, please. And so the demonstrations, right? One of the things that this was about was this allowances, 50 million rupiah allowance that legislators were giving themselves for, I guess, for housing. 50 million rupiahs. Well, that was in addition to their salaries. So they're getting around 100 million rupiahs a month. President Prabowo announces revocation of House member allowances. Members of Parliament Sahroni and Kuya deactivated. President Prabowo said that allowances for members of the Indonesian House of Representatives, DPR RI, will be revoked. In addition, the government also agreed to impose a moratorium or stop working visits by members of the Indonesian House of Representatives abroad, junkets. Prabowo conveyed this policy in a press statement on Sunday, August 31st. In response to the genuine aspirations of the people, I have received reports from the chairman of the political parties that they have taken firm action against their respective members of the House of Representatives, specifically against those members of the DPR who may have made false statements, the president said in his statement. Then the DPR leaders announced that they would revoke several DPR policies, including the amount of DPR member allowances and a moratorium on overseas working visits, something that has been wildly unpopular with the people for a long time. In addition, the president stated that the party chairman had agreed to revoke the membership of their cadres who had recently made inappropriate statements to the public. In addition, the party chairman and leaders of the Indonesian House of Representatives also agreed to ask their members to always be sensitive and always side with the interests of the people. Furthermore, the president emphasized that the government respects freedom of expression as regulated in the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In addition, President Prabowo also cited Law Number 9 of 1998 regarding the peaceful conveyance of aspirations. However, he said, if the implementation involves anarchic activities, destabilization of the state, destruction or burning of public facilities resulting in the loss of life, threats to and looting of homes and public institutions as well as private homes, this constitutes a violation of the law. And the state is obligated to present and protect its people. Officials on duty must protect the public and safeguard public facilities built with public funds. Officials on duty must also enforce the law if violations threaten the lives of the wider community. And when the president made this statement, he was accompanied by the leaders of some of the major parties in Indonesia. Meanwhile, 4 controversial members of the DPR have now been suspended by their party. And now here's an opinion piece on what has been happening and the meaning from 2 Indonesian academics. After mass protest, will our democracy survive? As smoke rises from several burned legislative council buildings and thousands of Indonesians flood the streets in what has become the largest wave of protests since the 1998 reform era, one question hangs over us like a dark cloud. Will our democracy survive? Mass protests, especially nonviolent ones, may typically support and strengthen democracy by giving voice to the people, holding power accountable, and driving necessary policy changes. However, mass protests can also be distorted or used as a pretext by authoritarian leaders to suppress dissent and undermine democratic institutions. The outcome will depend on the nature of protests, whether violent or nonviolent, and the responses of the authorities. The current political crisis in Indonesia was sparked by something far more mundane and yet symbolically grotesque, an increase in housing allowances for members of the House of Representatives for 50 million rupiah per month. This policy was introduced amid worsening economic conditions, stagnant wages, the normalization of corruption cases, and widespread public dissatisfaction with government services. To many, this was not just political negligence. It was a moral betrayal. More importantly, the decision exacerbates social resentment driven by rising income inequality in the country. The total compensation received by House members, including base salary and allowances, is estimated to be about 30 to 50 times the average minimum wage, further highlighting the stark divide between political elites and ordinary citizens. The widening income gap between state officials and the general public has become increasingly visible. The public is aware that lawmakers and government officials, especially those holding structural positions in the bureaucracy, are entitled to various additional benefits, including performance, housing, and transportation allowances, and even official cars and drivers. The World Bank highlights that Indonesia faces rapidly rising income inequality with significant drivers, including unequal access to quality education, a divided labor market where skilled workers benefit disproportionately, and a lack of adequate social protection programs for the poor. Unfortunately, efforts to reduce poverty and inequality, such as fiscal reforms and investments in social services, have had limited success, particularly in enhancing the effectiveness of social spending and increasing tax revenues to fund pro-poor policies. Inequality undermines democracy by creating unequal access to political resources, which translates into unequal influence over the political agenda and policy making. This will erode trust in political institutions. The wealthy can use their resources to lobby and control political and law enforcement institutions, while growing polarization and grievances fueled by inequality make citizens more susceptible to anti-democratic leaders and mobilization. While the protests have spread to many places across the country, the government only responds with public apologies, symbolic visits to rally victims' families, the detention of several police officers, and promises to do a better job without any immediate action for planned significant structural changes. We know that the problem lies in government policies, such as the free meals program, the red and white cooperatives, the community schools, and various other policies that are not oriented towards economic growth and job creation, but rather focused on high spending that benefits more their cronies and the military. It is understandable that what is happening in Indonesia presently is elite cohesion in the face of a legitimacy crisis. Democracy becomes a formal stage where the elite can remain solid while shutting off access to change. When the political elite agree to maintain the stability of power, pressures from below will not penetrate the layers of power unless there is internal division. Today, what should have been the main opposition force, the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, has instead begun to move closer to President Prabowo's circle of power, especially after Prabowo granted amnesty to PDIP Secretary General, who had been convicted in a bribery case. Under these circumstances, rather than weakening, the coalition and consolidation of power elite have become even more solid. Thus, we are now at a dangerous crossroads. President Prabowo has responded by ordering the military and police to take firm action against violent protests, regardless of their very repressive track records against mass actions. If mass protests intensify beyond control, especially with escalating calls for the dissolution of the House, widespread destruction of public facilities, burning of government buildings, and even increasingly violent looting, the prospect of democratic breakdown becomes real. This will give the opportunity to the president to declare a state of emergency. The worst scenario is if martial law, a set of regulations that are enforced after military authority cedes power from the ruling government, is enforced. However, the government must realize that the anger is different from past waves of protests. Moreover, the movement is fueled by accumulated public frustration along with social resentment. If this movement continues to grow organically and unites student activists, labor groups, religious leaders, and civil society, and continues to receive positive responses from the public, then the regime may collapse under its own weight. If the people come to feel that their voices are ignored and the system is completely closed, then the path they choose may turn radical and destructive. As we have seen recently, people have begun looting the homes of public officials and even several shops in Jakarta. With public trust in the government eroding, many Indonesians seem to have embraced the political adage adopted from a phrase by John Mitchell, former Attorney General during the Nixon administration: "Don't watch what politicians say, watch what they do." Democracy endures not because elites are benevolent, but because they fear the consequences of ignoring the people. Protests are not threats to be contained. Rather, they are voices that must be heard. Responding to them requires bold policy changes, not just words wrapped in rhetorical speeches. However, if that fear fades, if they believe that unity among the powerful is enough to silence dissent, we may be witnessing a protest movement that becomes a prelude to democratic breakdown. And that is the last thing we want to see. And things in Bali seem to be back to normal. Is all of this upheaval over the last week going to result in any positive changes in Indonesia? Well, it seems to have brought out a lot of tough talk from the government. And the UN has called for investigations into reports of police brutality, as well as some NGOs here in Indonesia. There's some interesting comments from young Indonesians on TikTok and on Instagram talking about this and talking about how they, as young people, feel about the situation in Indonesia today, and talking about corruption and this widening gap between the rich and the powerful and the rest of the country. And if you know any young people, you know things are not easy, not just here in Indonesia. You find this spreading all over the world. And this is partly what is causing this rise in right-wing political movements throughout the world. Just going to have to see how things turn out. But it's Bali. Don't worry. Be happy. And that is it for today. Thanks for viewing. Be kind to someone today. We need a lot of kindness right now. Take care. And I will see you again next Wednesday. Have a great week and weekend.